Welcome, guys, to another episode of the TBI Show. And on today's episode, we have Todd Bookspan with us, who is a coach, a productivity guru, and the founder of Win by Noon. Tuning in all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to the episode, Todd.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm super excited to have a little fun with you guys.
Thank you. And sorry for our tardiness today.
I wasn't going to tell anybody.
Yeah, and for our listeners, I'm Karan Singh.
This is Navroop Judge.
And this is Weiming Pang.
And we haven't been on this for a while, so we're back at it now. So Todd, tell us more about yourself. So how did you get into? So you're a founder of Win by Noon, which is I'll let you explain. But how did you start? How did you get into this company?
Yeah,
how did you start Win by Noon?
I'll kind of give a little bit of my story. I mean, my main career was in mortgage, so I ran a large mortgage team. I'd grown branches as a recruiting branch manager. Built the business that way, but really ultimately focused on building a team, and had a fairly successful mortgage team. Was ranked in the top 25 in the country for the number of loans that I did my last year producing, which was in 2015. And at that time, I had been coached for a decade by a company called Building Champions, and I was a client of theirs, and I always just loved helping others. And it was just one of the things I was passionate about. I'd helped develop a group coaching program for them while I was still doing loans. And then that kind of got phased out. And I thought, gosh, I really loved that and had the opportunity to get into coaching. And so I left kind of at the prime of my career. I kind of surprised a lot of people that I left origination to pursue coaching. And I really enjoyed the coaching chair. I did one-on-one coaching, primarily in the mortgage space. I was all mortgage people except for a husband and wife veterinarian, kind of outlier. And I coached all the way down from a CEO of a small independent mortgage company to one of the top loan officers in the country to what I called young guns. A lot of my CEO friends had kind of an up and comer, and they wanted me to coach them. And kind of along the way, while I was coaching, as I was helping one of these young guns one day, he was just asking me, "Hey, coach, help me, I'm stuck." And he was kind of going crazy. He had a lot going on. He was had a new father and just was super busy. And when you're a coach, you learn to shut up and you learn to ask good questions. And that wasn't my strength. And so I always had a sign on my post note on my computer, and a sign on my wall. The post note said, "Talk less," and then the sign on the wall said, "There's magic in the pause," to be uncomfortable when someone wasn't saying something. And so I started asking them better questions and realizing, really comparing his business now, like how many leads was he getting, how many applications was he taking, how many people was he talking to my business, and realized he was super busy, but his production wasn't there. So it wasn't very productive. And so over the course of that conversation, I walked him through kind of the productivity system I created for myself that I'd really built into that group coaching program. And at that point, what I had done was I had the biggest change. It's gonna sound really weird. I guess now I'm kind of, let me back up for just a second. So the previous 3 years before I actually had that banner year where I was ranked top 25 in the country, I did a lot of loans. I was doing over 400 loans a year, and it was about $80 million in production. And so it was good business. I was really proud of the business, but I was kind of stuck. I don't know if you guys have ever kind of been stuck before, but it was stuck at a good number. And, but I'd written in my business vision, I was going to be $100 million producer someday. And I was still stuck. I was stuck at 80 million, 82 million, 84 million. And I really had to spend some time looking back and saying, well, what did I do? What did I do that got in my way this year? So I spent a lot of time in reflection and really looking at what's going on in business. And I think that when people are busy in sales, doesn't matter what career you're in, you typically are too frantic to do that. And when I finally was forced to do that by my coach, of course, I realized that it was the fact that I had people who could schedule for me, and they could schedule for me whenever it was good for them. So I had a business development manager. She would schedule meetings with realtors when realtors were available. They wanted to meet in the morning. Well, the morning for me was my most productive time. So by the time I would get done with that meeting and get to work, I'd be busy reacting to everything going on around me. And I just wouldn't always get my most important priorities done. I also work with my wife. Well, my wife could schedule for me because she's my wife. I had a business partner. He could schedule for me. I had an assistant. They could schedule for me. So when I went into that next year, I blocked off the morning from 8:30 to 11:30. And everyone's like, well, why don't you call it Win by 11:30? Because, of course, Win by Noon sounds way cooler. But ultimately at 8:30, I would go and I'd hide and I'd do my most important priorities. And so that's really what launched me from 400 loans to 550 loans, from 80 million to 115 million in 1 year. The market in Phoenix was flat that year. I didn't go out and get a new real estate team to work with. I didn't go out and get a new builder. I just was so laser focused with my time to make sure I did the most important priorities first before I get distracted. So going back to my conversation with that coaching client, I walked him through how I had blocked my time and what I did each day and how I was productive. And he said, "Hey, coach, if you could put that system together for me, I think I could be successful and win by noon too." And then lo and behold, I literally walked out of that coaching call, went over to Adam, who's my right hand at Win by Noon, who's a graphic designer, and said, "Hey, take this notebook." I handed him my old notebook and let's make that into a product. And that was sort of when it was launched. And after about a year of coaching and doing Win by Noon, I really thought I could impact more people with Win by Noon. So I left coaching to be a full-time focused on growing Win by Noon. And we currently have about 2,500 subscribers. It's kind of split pretty evenly between loan officers and real estate agents. We also have a small but growing insurance agent group, and then just kind of some sales executives. So that's the story.
That's awesome, man. So you mentioned that you um, blocked off, well, maybe we can get into the nitty gritty later, but what are some of your important tasks that you were doing from 8:30 to 11:30?
The biggest thing I think that I did that I wasn't consistent at before was calling leads, right? And the studies show that the only about 4 or 5% of leads are converted on the first 2 calls, yet only 10% of people make 3 calls or more in sales. And if you look at the statistics, there's statistics from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There's statistics from a guy named Chris Smith who wrote a book called The Conversion Code. And in both of their studies, MIT says if you make 6 phone calls, you're 90% likely to reach a lead. The Conversion Code in his studies, he found that if you made 6 calls, you were 94% likely to get a hold of a lead, yet most people quit after 2 calls, if they even make 2 calls. And I made a lot of calls. I had a 7-call system, but I wasn't consistent at doing it, right? I might miss a day because I had a really important meeting. And by really important, it was important to them I met at that time, but I could have said to them, "Hey, can we meet later in the afternoon?" And they might've said yes. In fact, I found they probably would. And so lead calls was my number one. Number 2 thing I found as a loan officer when I looked at my numbers was I was really good from lead to application. And if I could get someone a pre-qualification letter issued, guess what? It was more likely they would buy a house. And my real estate agent partners were counting on me to get their leads converted so that they could show them houses. But someone would do an application, and I was like most loan officers, I was foolish enough to think, well, just because they did an application, they're going to give me the tax returns I need to make sure they actually really qualify. And that's not always the case. So that was my other critical daily activity, was following up on applicants who I hadn't gotten across the finish line. And so I said I grew my business without getting any new partners at teams. I was just better at converting the leads that they were giving me, and I increased my conversion rate. So those were really my number 1 and 2 that I did every single day. And then I had other things that I did depending on the day of the week.
Wow, that's really interesting, Todd. And there was something that you actually mentioned that it kind of immediately gave me a question mark, because I want to know a little more, and I'm sure the our audience members want to know a little more as well. You mentioned that you had a 7-call system. Now, I've dealt with a lot of realtors and real estate professionals, and they have also something similar where they're also calling clients. But the one thing that seems to differ from individual to individual is, when do they follow up? Like, what is the time gap in between the calls that makes it more effective? Is it, trying to annoy somebody every day by calling them every day? Or, do you wait a day in between the first and second call, or maybe 2 days? What's too long? What's too short? What's the magic number?
I love that. I love that question. And I definitely certainly don't necessarily know that I know the magic. I'll tell you, my 7-call system at that time was I would call twice the first day. So it depended on what time they called me, but I was calling twice the first day. I was calling the second day, the third day, and then every other day for 2 weeks. And that was my 7-call system. And it was pretty successful, because at that time I'd seen somewhere that if you called 7 times, you were 90% likely to reach someone. And so that was my system. That was my unique value proposition to my realtor partners. Hey, I'm going to call your leads. Because most of the time, truly, loan officers just say, "Oh, I'll call," and they really don't until you call and say, "Hey, have you heard back from the Smith family?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I left them a voicemail," and then they realize they forgot to call them. Hey, do you happen to have their phone number? And I wasn't perfect, but I would wake up saying, "Hey, I'm going to call my leads today," and then I would get distracted by something else because it wasn't my number 1 priority. So once I made it my number 1 priority, I did that. So that was my system. And then of course I texted in there, and of course we had emails in there. I would tell you the best one I've ever heard was from Chris Smith at the Conversion Code, and he worked for a small mortgage company you guys may have heard of. He was the number 1 loan officer at Quicken Loans. And so their 6-call system that they had there, or maybe he just used it at his company called Curator that he used, that he now runs. It's a lead generation company for realtors and loan officers. But his 6-call system was kind of crazy. They called. So, Karan calls me, I would call him immediately. And if he didn't answer, I'd hang up and I'd call right back. So they called that the double double, which, is annoying, right? For me as a dad, I always thought of my kids calling from, a friend's house. But, it's effective because a lot of the phones now block out the first call. But if someone calls twice, you can get through even when someone has it set up where you can't get through to them. So they would do that initial double double right away. And then they would actually call back 10 minutes later. That was call number 3. So I already told you, only 10% of people make 3 calls or more. They were doing those 3 calls in the first 10 minutes. At that point, they would send a text message and they would follow up with their next phone call. And then at the end of the day, they would call the 4th time, and then they would call 2 more times the following day. And then it would go into a lower rotation, probably with newer team members or loan officers. They're making their 6 phone calls in the first 48 hours, which you just said it, that's kind of annoying, right? It's kind of stalking people, but it's effective. And in the end, when you're buying leads, right, like that company was paying that much money for a click, you know what, you should probably go after it. And I think if you're in any kind of sales, it's probably a pretty similar number for all those, depending on where your leads are coming from and how you incubate them. But I think you have to have a system for it. And again, you could say, gosh, I don't want to have that one that Chris Smith did. Like for me, I would have thought that's kind of crazy. But if I was doing loans now, I might actually do that, at least with some of the leads and some of the clients, depending how cold or warm they were. But I think ultimately in the end, it doesn't matter what works for you, right? If you've got warm leads that you're getting from your sphere, maybe you don't need to call them that frequently. Maybe you don't have to harass them. Maybe you just call them, once for the first 3 days, and then, every other day after that, like I did. Or maybe instead you come up with your own system. But I think it's important to have a system and be committed to it, because in the end, if someone is trusting you to be their partner or trusting you to be the one to guide their client through it, or if it's a client who called you and you have to get a hold of them by chasing them to call them back, you want to make sure you do that. And because I think you owe it to them, I think you owe it to your partner, especially if you're good at what you do. I mean, certainly you guys, right, selling real estate, if a lead reaches out to you, you guys are great. You want to make sure that they get the service that you offer versus falling into somebody else's lead funnel and then getting mediocre service.
Absolutely. And kind of, following up on that, do you still use your 7-call system, or has that evolved over time?
My team still uses it, right? Since I'm not, actively doing loans and doing that generation, they do that basic system. Now they've got a little bit of technology helping them, right? We've got better CRMs now. And they're mainly working warm leads. And so because that doesn't need to be as extreme as that 6-call system. But like one of the loan officers on our team works with a big real estate team. And, a lot of the big real estate teams have mandatory call hours with their team. So like his big team that he works with, they call every single day from 9 a.m. to noon. So they've got a 3-hour call window. And so pre-COVID, he would go in there twice a week and actually call alongside of them. And then now he's calling during that time, and he's, taking the leads that they're generating. He's also following up on the leads that they've given him during that time. And so again, it depends on where, they're buying data and cold leads. And so with those, it, requires more phone calls. So I think it's always situational, but in the end, if, someone doesn't have a system and someone doesn't actually schedule time to follow up, I think that's a problem, right? Is that who you want to do business with? Is that who you want to trust your business with? And so I really preach, you got to block time every day and do that. I think whether you're a realtor, a loan officer, insurance agent, any of those factors. And then one question that you asked before that I didn't answer is you said, hey, what time is best to call? And so again, studies show that the best time to reach people is between 8 and 10 a.m. and between 4 and 6 p.m. And then I saw one recently that said the best time to get an email returned is 11 a.m. I'm looking for more data on that. So certainly if anyone out there has it, I would love to know. And I often find a lot of times realtors in particular always push back. The best time for me to reach leads is between 4 and 6. And I say, well, awesome. How often do you do that? Are you doing it consistently? And then they all kind of duck their heads and say, no, I'm not. And so I will say, well, great. Well, if statistics show that between 8 and 10 is also as equally as good of a time, and you can control 8 to 10 a whole lot better, right? You can control your morning before you have to react to everything else. So why not block it off, do those calls first, then react. And then guess what? If you missed them and you have time between 4 and 6, great, make a second phone call, because no one who you reach out to ever complains that you reached out to them too much. I mean, all I would say is, gosh, you know what? Just think how good my customer service is gonna be once we're working together if I work this hard to track you down.
And they're usually grateful. I mean, often, like I've mentioned it before, it's like getting people to take their medicine, right? I mean, even if you want to refinance them into a lower rate and stuff, it's like, this is good for you. You'll save money. And I often tell them like, hey, like if you had a credit card that was charging you $500 a month, you would be all over it. How quickly can I cancel this credit card? Right? Well, your lender is charging you $500 a month extra because you could be in a lower rate by now. Why aren't you all over it? And
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. You could use it if you want.
Well, yeah. So I think, back to what Weiming was saying, like, he was mentioning like, do people get annoyed? Well, we're calling them so many times, but I feel like if our service is genuine, right, and we're really out there to, save people money, help them get a better rate, or just deliver just exceptional service, well, then we're really helping them find that, fulfill that need. So I think, I think if you're genuine, then it's all justified, because at the end of the day, they might be busy not answering your phone. So like you said, if you're following up with them enough, that's the service you're going to provide them when they start working with you.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, right? You got to care. If you truly love what you do and you care about the people, then it's easy. And then it's going to show once you get a hold of them. And in the end, if you call them that many times and they don't respond, then obviously it wasn't meant to be. They're not, they're not it, or it's not the right time. And then eventually they'll come back.
And whoever referred them to you, I mean, you can in good faith say, hey, I did my part. What are you going to do?
So after hearing all this, I'm hearing a lot of consistency. I hear there's planning, like how many calls you're going to make. And then like there's the actually doing it. What are we going to call the execution? So
yeah, that's great. Great word.
So, I feel like, I suffer with this where I'll be like, I'm going to do this, but I won't sometimes execute on it. Like, I'm one of those that will duck their head down. Right. So, how does your tool, or how does Win by Noon, or whatever kind of light you want to shed on this, how does your tool help people like me?
Well, I think there's a couple of parts to it, right? I mean, at its, at its core, it's just a day planner, right? I mean, it's a day planner that people use to be more productive. And some people are like, well, I don't use paper. Well, then don't use it, right? There's other ways you can do it. But ultimately, people who tell me when they use it to track their calendar and to do their to-do list, they're more productive, right? It's designed to be a system that helps you figure out how many phone calls do I have to make, how many people do I have to talk to or meet with in order to get a closed transaction. So again, regardless of how you are in sales, you've got to do one of those things, right? You're either meeting people or talking to people or calling them to meet them. And then wouldn't it be nice to know that if you want to close 50 transactions, this year, that you have to make 20 calls in order to close a transaction. So, therefore you got to make 20 times 50 calls this year in order to get there. That's to me is the ultimate in sales. And so it's a tool that helps you do that, helps you monitor your conversion rates so that you can figure out, okay, hey, I did better this month than last month. Like I said, for me, I realized I was doing better because I was actually converting more leads. I didn't have more leads. I was just converting the leads that I had at a higher percentage, which led to more closings. And so it's a business planning system where you can actually, at the end of the week, it says total up your numbers. At the end of the month, it says total up your numbers again and do your conversion rate. So it helps you do that. And then I think the other part is just, it's a philosophy. And again, you don't have to buy the planner to Win by Noon. It's just this whole idea that most of the time we wake up with great intentions, but at the end of the day, we have failed to accomplish those most important priorities. And so for me, having the planner sitting there in front of me on my desk, having looked at it in the morning, said, hey, these are my big rocks today, right? I did a webinar this morning for a mortgage company. I got on and did a Clubhouse group thing that I ran with a bunch of big people in the mortgage space at 3:00. I had this, scheduled for the evening. And it's knowing what are your priorities and making sure that you fit everything else in between to make sure that you get it all done. And so it's being proactive with those key things. And then that way you can react to everything else, because you guys in real estate, right? You got to react. A client calls you and says, I want to go look at a property. Then you got to get busy and react and get them going. But, there's things that you have to do to be successful to get out there and do that. And so I just think from a philosophical perspective is, just do those most important things that, drive your business right when you get to work, right when you get up. And then once you've crushed those, then the rest of the day, it doesn't matter what you do, then you're going to be successful. Then you've called your leads, then you've generated your leads, or whatever it is that you have to get done in your role and your work.
So someone that's in your program or, buys the philosophy or drinks the Kool-Aid, either they're a loan officer or a real estate agent, what does their typical morning look like? Some of your top producers, could you kind of walk us through that?
The funny part is I would tell you that they all look similar, but different, right? And so, again, if I'm coaching them and tell them, hey, try to live, by the philosophies I teach, it doesn't matter what time their day starts, right? I'm a big proponent on the personal side that having a great morning routine is really important, whether you wake up and you're reading something spiritual or meditating or exercising or whatever it is you're going to do, do something personal before you jump into work. So I would say that most of the super producers that I interview are, have some type of formal morning routine that they're very disciplined in. And, I've seen that. We did a big mortgage event last year where we had, 30 loan officers who did over 4 billion in production last year. We're doing a real estate agent version of that coming up. And we've got 25 agents who did over 4 billion in production last year. Same thing. And those that I've interviewed already, they have that great morning routine. And then they shift in where they've actually got commitments in the morning. So they're normally doing those most critical meetings. So it depends on what their role is, but someone who's actually producing typically is going to be doing lead follow-up every day. I mean, unless you only have 3 leads or something, and then you might not want to harass the 3 leads that many times during the same day or two period. But I always see lead generation as a big part of it. In real estate, I see calling your database as a big part of it, right? Obviously, some of the bigger coaching programs and franchises out there, have some type of 33 touch campaign or whatever their follow-up campaign is going to look like. And I see that even with my friends in real estate where I can just kind of know every once a quarter, they're going to call me and check in and see how I'm doing. And I just know that successful real estate agents do that. But I also know that even the most successful, oftentimes, if they don't have time scheduled to do it, they don't get it done. So I think it's kind of what gets scheduled gets done. And then I think kind of other things that they may have spread throughout their week will be, client updates on clients who are, in transaction, client updates for clients who, may have a listing that hasn't gone under contract yet. Obviously today, that's not likely. If it's priced right, we know in all these markets across the country, it's going to sell in hours or, at least days. But keep people updated. Communication, I think is really important. And then I like this idea in the mortgage world and in real estate world of doing annual reviews where you're actually doing a formal review with a client where you're on the phone with them over 30 minutes, going over their mortgage to make sure that is it still fitting their needs. Even if they got a super low rate last year when the rates were lower, maybe something's changed. Maybe their kid's going to college, they had a baby, they're thinking about moving or consolidating debt. There may be a need for that. I think the same thing is true in real estate. I think real estate agents who aren't proactively calling their clients and saying, gosh, you know what, you did such a great job when you bought that house in 2018. It's gone up, 27% since then. You now have, $300,000 worth of equity that you didn't have before. And being the expert that they reach out to, because right now they're going online and they're going online to, one of those websites that is capturing their data, and they don't realize that, and their data is getting sold, and then they're going to get called by that website because that website is probably a real estate company now. And so I think that real estate agents are making a mistake by not raising their hand and saying, I'm the expert still. I sold you that house before, but I'm still the person who's going to give you the accurate value. They're still going to go to those websites and look at them, but you want them to call you because now they can click a button there. Their data gets sold to multiple realtors who are going to call them and try to get their business. They can push a button and sell them their house now for cash. And so I feel like those are the critical activities that should be somewhere built into somebody's week. And then you could certainly add other things like handwritten notes and things like that, but that wasn't my skill set. But I'm always jealous those people who are good at that.
I'd love if that was somehow streamlined where the notes would and all that would just kind of automatically happen. That'd be amazing. Yeah. I have a question.
That exists now. Apparently you can tie that to your CRM where you push a button and it'll, a pen will write your handwriting and ship it out for you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to ask you.
I would love to get that CRM. I didn't know they did that. What CRM is that?
There's one that ties to a bunch of them. I don't know. I'll send you guys the stuff on. I got a big packet sitting on my counter that someone sent us to take a look at.
Okay, cool.
So you strike me as someone who values work-life balance. I mean, someone who can be at the peak of their production and say, you know what, I want to do something different, which is probably better for your soul, I guess, or better for you in your mental space at that time, which is why you made that transition instead of just, being like, I'm just going to stay on this path, right? On the other hand, you're coaching people who are high achievers as well too, right? Because that's the whole point. So basically it's achieving in a certain amount of time frame while still living a life that's like worth living. What do you think is the cap on hours someone should work in a week? What do you think is a cap? And I know it can vary to everyone differently and whatnot, but like, what would you recommend? Like, what's that, maybe even for you, what's that optimal space?
I definitely think it varies people by people, but I think it's a brilliant question. And I think I always say there's seasons, right? I mean, I know there's not a loan officer I know who didn't work ridiculous hours the past 12 months.
Yeah.
And, it's a season, right? I mean, it's a market of a lifetime. And I know right now realtors, because of the fact that the market is so tight and, where before you might show someone 5 houses and they could pick whichever one they wanted next week and write an offer, now you've got to show them 15 houses and they got to write an offer on each one all at the same time. And so I think there's these seasons where you've got to work hard. And I think that, everyone just has to know their body. I don't know that the 40-hour work week is a real thing anymore. I know, top producing people in all the industries, and, they were working, 12, 14, 16-hour days, working 7 days a week because they had to serve their clients. And it's, you could say they had to because they wanted to make the money, but no, they had to serve their clients. They wanted to get their clients the best loans, or they want to help their clients get into the best home. And so what I found for me is, in my planner, I've got a big fold out calendar. That's 11 by 17. It's thicker paper, and so I go in there and I just put the big rocks in there first. And so, for us, it's been kind of weird in COVID because my calendar was blank for 6 months where I didn't have a lot of big things. But like right now, where my kids are in college, so I've got when's spring break next year? It's already on my calendar. When's fall break? When does school start? And so I'm starting to build my calendar with what are those critical things that I want to do for my family or personally? What are the events that I want to attend now that I can attend live events again? To grow personally and get those blocked off first. And so I always reverse engineer that. And then you have to look at, well, what does my family want? Does my family want me home for dinner at 5 o'clock every night? Well, if that's what they want, then I should be home at 5 o'clock every night. And there was times where I would get home at 5 o'clock for dinner. I would work till 7, put my kids to bed, and then I would work again till 10 o'clock. And, if that was a season that I had to do it, I would. Now I wouldn't want to do that. Now I would coach someone not to do that. Well, hey, how can you fit your time in? So at 5 o'clock, you're done for the day. Then you can unplug with your kids. Then you can spend time with your spouse. And so I think it's just kind of really personal, but I think if you take the time and figure out what is the me time that I need, what's important to me? Do I need to make sure that I've got, 2 hours in the morning for those morning activities? Do I want to make sure I've got time every day at lunch, to go work out at the gym? Do I want to make sure I'm home at a certain time to take a walk or eat dinner with my family? And then build your work around that. And in the end, I think if you're laser focused on it, I got a buddy of mine, he was one of my coaches for 4 years, he's a good friend and mentor. His name is Bill Hart. And he called it the day before vacation miracle. We've all been there where you have this big to-do list, you've had it for 2 weeks and you can't get it done, but then you're going on vacation this afternoon and you manage to knock it all out. And so that was kind of the focus of my win by noon thing, is when I put those important things in there and did it every day. The crazy thing was, I almost probably could have at that time gone home somewhere between 10 and 12 and then not done anything else for the rest of the day, and then just come back the next day, make the calls that I missed and do the follow-ups. For me, I was reacting in the afternoon, I was meeting with other people. But, I think you got to look at your own calendar, but I certainly think that it's okay to work long periods really hard, but then you've got to schedule that time where you just totally unplug, you totally get stuff done. It's just good brain space. I mean, my wife, has worked really hard the last year running a mortgage team, and we unplugged this past weekend for 2.5 days for our anniversary. And it was just so pleasant for not to be on email, not to be on work phone, and just to actually have time to think. Yeah, we talked about work a little bit, but we really tried not to. And I think that that's the bigger question, is what do you need to optimize your performance? And I think if you figure that out for yourself and then schedule the time off, because a blank calendar is dangerous, right? If your calendar is blank, you say, hey, I'm available anytime, then again, someone's going to pick the time that's best for them. Instead, if you say, gosh, you know what? Here's the time I have available for you. And then you've got your other time all blocked off. I think that's when you're going to be happier, have a more fulfilled life, have better relationships, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your kids.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry. I was gonna say that it just gives you more quality time. Like if you've done what you're supposed to do, and you're an achiever, it just gives you more quality time. If you're maybe with a friend for an hour, or you're having dinner with your wife, and it does sort of free space, in the mind, because you could also say, oh man, you're just too scripted, right? Everything is just on paper. You're just we're jotting things down. But I think the flip side of that is it's very beneficial. I feel so, and I think I can get better at that. But yeah, I think it's very beneficial.
Like the Jocko Willink, discipline equals freedom. The more disciplined you are, the more freedom you're going to get.
Yeah.
I feel like clients actually kind of respect it. When you tell us a client like, hey, Friday through Sunday, I'm going to take some time off my family. My kid needs to see some snow. Simple as that, and you get everything done and say, but I'm off until Sunday or something. They respond well. They say, okay, cool. have a good time, So.
I think people respect that. I think people respect you when you respect yourself and the commitments that you have. And, as long as it's not going to impede their ability, if they're obviously only flying in for the weekend, that's a good thing that you guys have, you could refer to each other. I mean, you have someone else that you know and trust that can help, with that if it's truly necessary. But you're right. Most of the time you can tell someone, hey, I'm going to be unplugged. And they'll be like, awesome, have a great time, especially when you tell them the why, because they're probably thinking, I should do that with my kid and take my kid to the snow, or gosh, I was glad that my dad did that with me when I was younger. And I just think that most people right now are missing an opportunity. I think that in our businesses, COVID's been so hard on us that we haven't spent time with our friends. We haven't spent time with our family. And it's probably a good time to do it. Even you guys said you haven't been together and doing this podcast together in the same room. I mean, that's good. It's really healthy. And I know I've been spending a lot more time in 2021 reconnecting with people that transparently I was just busy last year and didn't connect with everything going on.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned, where you were doing like 80 million one year, then 82, and it would just stay in that. It would just stay. You wouldn't go to the next level. What was that like that got you to the next level? I know we talked a lot, but I wanted to talk about that, because we're all, entrepreneurs here. And it's like, I always feel like I was talking to one of my fellow buddies who also is in real estate and has his own business. He was talking about how he felt like he's sitting on like the edge, right? And he could go wherever he wants to go. Like he can go backwards, he can jump down, he could fly. What was that? What was that one thing or two things or three things that allowed you to just fly to the next level?
I think the biggest thing was frustration, right? I was just frustrated that I couldn't figure it out. And that's when my coach said, well, your numbers, have you really looked at it? Have you really looked at your schedule? And because I was a nerd and I had these sheets that I created which is what a page of Win by Noon looks like now. And I had shrunk them down and put them in this little notebook. I taped them in there, super nerdy. I had the data. And so I just looked at the data to see what the data told me. And so I had that feeling of frustration, like I just couldn't break through it. And then I had the data and I just spent the time to figure out, well, what do I need to do to get there? Because in the end, if most people know what their results are, right? Most people can look and they can see, okay, I have a paycheck as a realtor and from 20 transactions last year, or I'm a loan officer and this is how many loans I closed, or they had how many insurance policies I sold, whatever it was that they were doing, right? Could be your 1031 transactions you closed, right? So you've got a number that you closed, and then there's something else that you might have. So like in the loan world, you had loan applications in your system. You might have the pre-qualifications that were issued if you had a system for that. If you put your leads into a CRM, you had your leads. So you could track at least the conversion between each of those. But for me, I had actually tracked all the people I called, and I'd actually recorded all the people I talked to and met with. So I actually knew exactly, if I took the time to look at it, I knew exactly what I had to do each day in order to hit my goal at the end of the year. But what I realized was, even though I knew that I wasn't doing it. So that's where that aha came in, where I looked at it and said, well, shoot, I know what I need to do. I'm just not doing it. And so that's where I had to say, well, then how do I protect myself from myself, right? I want to help people. I want to talk to people. I love doing that. And so that's when I said, gosh, if I can just block off that time and get it done, I will do it. And I know that sounds really simple, but it was really hard for me. And it's hard for most people, because most people get up, they pull out their phone, they start looking at their emails and texts, and then that's how they prioritize their day. And so instead, what I did was I got up, I opened up my CRM to my leads, and I prioritized what I knew. If I made a certain number of calls today, it was going to lead to a certain number of closings. And that's how, I blew the doors off the numbers, by getting laser focused on that piece. So for me, I would just encourage someone, well, first off, do you know your numbers? And if you don't, then start recording your numbers. And then second off, make sure you've got goals that are big and drive you. And then you can connect the dots between the two and figure out, well, how do I get there? If I don't have enough leads, then I got to, start calling people that can give me leads, right? If I'm a realtor, I'm going to call my database. If I'm a loan officer, I might call some realtors, and then just figure out how to bridge that gap. And I think that's where most of the time we're just so busy being busy, we don't take the time to look at it. And that's what I was busy, and my coach forced me to look at it. And luckily I already had the data. Now, most of the time I'm coaching new people to get out whatever it is, get a piece of paper and start tracking it. By Win by Noon, start tracking it. And then after a week, you can say, okay, how did I do? Here's how many people I talked to and called. Did I get my results? Yes or no? If I did, great. Rinse and repeat, do the same thing next week. If I didn't get the results I wanted, guess what? I better do more activities this week. And again, it's not rocket science, it's just looking at what you did. But most people just don't take the time to look at what they did. And then they get to the end of the year and say, that's really weird. I wanted to close 100 transactions. I only closed 80, where, I knew right away, am I on track today in March to hit my goals at the end of 2021 or not? Am I on track in April today to hit my goals in 2021 or not? So, the people that I coach and use my system aren't going to be surprised at the end of the year with their production, because they're actually pushing now to make sure that they do the activities to get those results.
Wonderful.
So and this applies to any industry, know your KPIs, what the important things that you need to get done, and focus on them instead of like focusing on everything. I think definitely honing down on that, like for us, is definitely making sales calls. If we don't make our sales calls, we're not going to convert. I'm pretty sure the same thing goes for Wayman, but for another industry, it might be something else.
So what about yourself? I mean, like the pillars of success, this is something that we always kind of ask our guests and stuff. I mean, I know we've touched on kind of like the living with intention type of thing, I guess you could call it, as well. I think that's kind of in line with what Win by Noon is as well. But how about other things, other main pillars that kind of have made you tick and drive you? And, yes, you now have this system and stuff that that you love. What else? What else can you touch on?
I've been pretty fortunate to be always pretty intrinsically motivated, right? I've always wanted to improve myself, and I've always wanted to win. And, I know sometimes that's hard for people to wake up and say, all right, what can I do? And what can I learn today? I kind of believe in that whole, thing that you're kind of the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so I've always really tried to push myself and those around me to be better. And I've always tried to find people who are way better than me to hang out with. I mean, there's nothing more fun than me to be the dumbest person in the room, which is pretty easy for me, and and just to be a sponge and absorb. And then, hopefully I have some value to add, when I'm hanging around, those different people. And I think that, one of the things I think that your real estate industry does really well is mastermind, and people get together. And so for me, that's been a big pillar, is masterminding, making sure that I get away from my house. Again, haven't done it in COVID, but get away and go to events where I can be surrounded by other people that motivate me, that have those same desires. Certainly for me, my family's always been a big driving factor to provide for them, and to be a great dad. And I think just having a coach, for me, the other parts, although, even when I stalled out, I had a coach. But, there's different times where you need coaches to speaking to you in different ways. And for me, having a coach that always holds me accountable and doesn't let me slide backwards, I feel that when I've stalled out, when I've hit those plateaus, it's because I wasn't allowing my coach to really push me like I needed to be pushed. And so I think that you always have to think about, what does that look like? Do you need to shake that up and, make some changes? But I think having somebody to hold you accountable, if you can't afford a coach, you have friends, and have your friends hold you accountable. So for me, that accountability was a lot of what drove me as well. I guess, I don't know if that's too many different pillars, but
No,
I think it was just a personal drive for success. I think it was surrounding myself with better people. And then I think having someone to hold me accountable.
Wonderful.
That's awesome. And earlier we were talking about like these companies that are just data aggregators and stuff, and they're just they do online marketing. Like Zillow's one of them. There's other companies that are doing it. And we mentioned that, hey, we could, as agents or as sales officers, we can definitely respond to these people that we have in our sphere before they go out and get in contact with these companies out there. What are your thoughts about like companies like Zillow and other companies that are out there? What are your thoughts about like that? Or do you think like what are your thoughts on that? Do you think they'll be taken over, or do you think agents and loan officers and
Well, Zillow is a real estate brokerage.
yeah,
They are.
no, exactly. But what I'm saying is, but they are a real estate brokerage. I mean, I market with Zillow. I buy leads from them, right? So, but what are your thoughts about it? Do you think that it'll completely get all technology, or do you think there's still going to be the human touch there that we're going to need, that or people are going to
I
still
think the
want?
answer is yes to both, right? I think that you're not going to be able to outspend. I mean, if you talk about real estate, you're not going to outspend, Zillow. You're not, any of these, they're all publicly traded. They've got more money than you'll ever have. So they can always outspend you. And then, for Zillow, it's a perfect example, right? Real estate agents and loan officers paid to build their infrastructure that they've now turned into, as you said, their own business to compete. And so they're always going to have that. And they're, the Quicken Loans of the world are always going to be able to manufacture a loan cheaper than other people potentially, but they're not going to have that human touch. And so I think what you're going to have is you're going to have two different, channels of business, and people will choose. They'll choose, do I want to go with the low cost, impersonal, fast food style? Here's your option. It's the same for everyone. Or do I want to have that personal touch? Yeah, may cost slightly more because they might not have the same discount, but get someone who's got a little bit more experience or a lot more experience, who's willing to show me different options, show me that, hey, it's just not, one size fits all, that there's other options. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of. I think that, the boutique person is going to continue to grow. And I think that the Zillows of the world are going to continue to take market share. I mean, they've certainly changed their model, and it's, you can either complain about it or you can adapt. And I think that there's room for everyone. It's just a matter of deciding, which bus do you want to jump on? And I think in the end, the consumer is going to determine that, right? Where do you get your drive? Because ironically, I've got friends who work for teams that all their business is Zillow business, and you know what, they love it. And I've got other people who think that's the worst thing in the world, and they have smaller teams and they focus on the clients, one client at a time, and build a relationship and rapport, and they're both successful. There's clients for both of them. And I think it's just a matter of, you could say that those companies are evil, but I think we just have a ton to learn when we learn from those companies. And there's a quote that I use when I teach a lot for mortgage loan officers, that the COO of Quicken said how that they feel like the lead conversion is the magic, that they marvel over just small micro percentages of increases in their conversion rates. And that's why I say, well, gosh, if the biggest company in the mortgage world is focusing on that, whether you're trying to do 10 loans or 110 loans, you should be focused on that too. And so that, I think we can villainize those people all we want, but they're going to continue to grow. Our clients are continuing to go there if we're not taking good care of them. And so I just say, gosh, how can I outmarket them to my database? I mean, I think there's proof out there in all the worlds that we're talking about, that you only need a small database of people that you nurture, that trust you, and you can sustain your business. It's just a matter of, do you want to blow it up really big? Then you might have to do something different to compete with those kinds of companies.
Very insightful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, last thing here, we can, I know we're going to wrap it up. What are some of your interesting books that you're reading, or any books that you recommend our clients or even us?
It's funny that you asked that. I'm just started rereading an oldie but a goodie for me. It's one of my all-time favorites, Darren Hardy's Compound Effect. It was this 10-year anniversary of it. So I just got that, and I've been reading that. I'm really into my health right now. I'm reading Fast This Way by Dave Asprey. I've spent the last couple of years hanging out with a group of entrepreneurs, and I was able to go on a fishing trip, 24 of us, and Dave was on the trip a couple of years, and he owns the company Bulletproof. But I think that that would be one of the things I should have said earlier, that I find top producers, a lot of them are super nerdy about their health. And so I'm reading that book on fasting. It's been really fascinating. I tend to read multiple books at once. There's a new book that's the next on my list. It's called Who Not How. It's by a guy named Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. Ben was in that group, and so I spent some time with him. He's a PhD. It's a really, I know what the premise of the book is, but it's really about building your team. So if that's something that you're interested in, I've heard a lot of great things about that. I just finished Becoming a Coaching Leader. It's by a guy by the name of Daniel Harkavy. He's the CEO and founder of Building Champions. So if you're thinking about what are the different perspectives as a leader, it's just a phenomenal read. I think from a sales perspective, I mentioned Bill Hart earlier. He wrote a book called White Collar Warrior. It's probably my number one gifted book last year. And just because I feel like anyone in sales can really learn from his experience from the coach's chair. Those are probably the handful of them, other than a few other nerdy health diet related books.
Well, awesome, man. Thank you for that. I wrote 2 of them down, but I'll just come back and listen to this again.
Sorry,
yeah,
I talked
so
fast.
where can people find you? I know you're not directly coaching now, but you have you do seminars, and you have the Win by Noon, the booklet and the calendar and all the tools. Where can people find you?
The best place to find me is just at winbynoon.com. My email is just todd@winbynoon. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and all those places. I'm not the best at social media because, like most people, I get sucked into it. So I really try to schedule and limit my time there. But you can always ping me through all of those places as well. But yeah, it's been a blast. I appreciate you guys having me on and asking me questions that most people have never asked me before. So it's kind of fun to talk about.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor, Todd. And we'll connect again.